Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It is Jordan Drake again. I know, but I just got the brand new Sony FX30. I think it's a really exciting camera and I really wanted to talk about it. And before I get into some details on it, first thing I want to mention is that Chris is actually filming me right now on this camera in S-Log3 that we'll have graded here for you. But let's get into what makes this camera so interesting. So for starters, what Sony has basically done here is take the FX3 body, which is really designed for video use. It is covered in Q20 mounts, tons of custom buttons on it, and they've put an APS-C sensor. So if you're wondering how this camera is ergonomically, just go watch our FX3 video. You'll find out all the details here. Let's talk about that sensor. That's the exciting part. So when I first started getting briefed on this camera, I thought, oh no, they did not put that ancient 24 megapixel sensor that scans so unbelievably slowly into a cinema camera, did they? And then I saw the specs and it's like, oh, this is interesting, 26 megapixels. Maybe they got that nice little Fujifilm X-T3, X-T4 sensor in this camera. That reads out a little bit faster, but then I saw it does 4K 60 with even less of a crop than that. This is a brand new sensor, and it's a relatively fast reading out sensor. All of my immediate concerns were allayed, and this is actually very exciting. Now this is an APS-C sensor, which means we get a 1.5 times crop compared to full frame, but interestingly, there's also a very minor crop in all of the 4K standard frame rates. 4K 24, 30, and 60p, you'll get a 1.04 times crop factor. It's an incredibly small crop, and I don't think it means you're gonna have to be reframing constantly. However, this does have the 4K 120 record option, which is really exciting if you want to do some slow motion, but that gives you a massive 1.6 times crop on top of your existing 1.5 times. I mean, this is giving you a sensor area very similar to like a Type 1 sensor. Image quality will be greatly degraded, but I mean, it is nice that it gives you the option of super high frame rate 4K recording. Now that sensor readout is also really important if you do want to take the occasional still with this camera, because this camera has no mechanical shutter. It's only shooting in its electronic shutter mode. And there, I would say for like casual photography, the readout is sufficient for it. But if you want to shoot any kind of fast action or panning with a subject, that rolling shutter is still definitely going to distort and ruin your pictures. This isn't a great photo camera. Okay, let's talk about picture profiles and recording modes. Chris is actually shooting me on the S-Cinetone profile right now, which is a really nice, easy to grade, almost finished profile that I use a lot of the time in lower contrast situations like we're in right now. But this camera does give you all the codec options and the 10-bit 422 recording that we first saw in the Sony a7S III, and we're now seeing in like the a7 IV, A1, and it means you've got a lot of different recording modes, data rate options available to you. Now, interestingly, when you're shooting log, this only has the ability to shoot S-Log3, not the S-Log2 profile, but if you're using a 10-bit recording mode, it gives you access to more dynamic range anyways. You'd pretty much always want to shoot this in S-Log3. All right, next up, let's talk about displays. I guess not displays, we'll just talk about the display, singular, that's on this camera. It's a fully articulating LCD, which videographers like myself love, and it is really nice. This has their sunny setting, which really brightens that display up if you're shooting in bright days, and it's compatible with working up to 4K 60 recording. And I know we keep hearing videographers don't use electronic viewfinders. Jordan, you're an anomaly when it comes to that. But I do find it extremely useful, not only in those bright situations, but also electronic viewfinders tend to be a lot sharper than the LCD flip-out panels that we find on these cameras. It means if I'm serious about nailing my focus, I'm going to use an external monitor all the time, which does add a lot of bulk to this camera. Now that said, the external monitor is not going to come disconnected all the time because we do have a full HDMI port on this camera. That helps quite a bit, but I would still kill for an electronic viewfinder. In terms of the storage this uses, it's very similar to a lot of the recent Sony full-frame cameras using CF Express Type A, the little guys, and SD cards. And you can use SD cards for all the recording modes in this camera. You're probably not going to use this for stills a whole lot, so for the most part, I'd just stock up on SD cards. A feature that I was really delighted to see on this camera that we sometimes don't see on more cinema-oriented cameras is in-body image stabilization. Now, before you get too excited, this is Sony's implementation of it, so it does work really nicely if you're trying to keep the frame static or do like a controlled pan. It's when you're walking with this camera that you can see the implementation of IBIS here is definitely a step behind a lot of the competition. There's a lot of bouncing there, and Sony seems to recognize that. So they give you the active steady shot mode, which does apply a little bit of a crop and does a really good job at faster frame rates and higher shutter speeds. The problem is if you're shooting 24 frames per second at a 50th of a second, you will get blurry frames, and it looks very weird to have stable footage with the odd blurry frame every once in a while. Now you can choose if you want to apply that digital stabilization after using Sony's Catalyst software, which is also now available for Premiere, but if you're a Resolve or Final Cut user like myself, then you're still going to have to use the dedicated software and round trip. It's a real hassle, and you'll have to decide if the results are worth it for you. Like most modern sensors, this is a dual gain sensor, and unlike most modern Sony cameras, this actually lets you choose which of those two gain settings you're at. So the base ISO, if you're shooting S-Log3, is 800, and then the second gain step is at 2500 ISO, but you can still, in its default mode, choose any other ISO settings there. What's interesting is from the cinema cameras, this gains the Cine EI function, where it's only going to shoot at 800 or 2500 ISO, and then you can apply exposure compensation to that. What's cool is then when you bring the footage into their Catalyst software, you will see those exposure adjustments already made to native 800 or 2500 ISO footage. So when are these Cine EI modes actually useful? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, if you're always shooting in one of those two base ISOs, it's nice to actually visualize the image closer to the final exposure that you're actually going to use in your edit. But also, what if you're shooting and then delivering it off to a different editor? It's really nice to use those Cine EI modes so they have a better idea of your actual intention when they import that footage into Sony Catalyst Browse. This is a feature that's been limited to only very high-end cameras and recently the FX3, and it's a welcome addition to see it here. But for myself, I'm shooting and editing everything myself, so I'm probably, if I'm shooting S-Log3, only ever going to shoot it at 800 and 2500 ISO and then adjust it to taste in post. This camera does feature Sony's new Bion's XR processor, and do you know what that means? That means we get the updated menu system, which is way better than the abominations that they've had before in the past. I do find it really nice and easy to navigate. You've got My Menu options where you can set up all your commonly used features in there, but there are a few actual video-specific tweaks to the menu system here. Biggest change is right at the top of the menu. We've now got the main 1 and main 2 options, which bring up a tile-based custom video menu for all the settings that you'll frequently change when you're shooting video. It's very similar to what we've seen on basically every professional cinema camera, and I do really like using this. The weird thing is it maintains the function menu interface Sony's been using forever, which is a lot less useful. I wish they'd just let you program the function button to bring up the main 1, main 2, but nope, you got to go into the hard menus for it. Good news is I'm pretty sure this is something that they could fix in firmware, but it just seems like a really silly mistake. I would say the primary competition for the FX30 is the Panasonic GH6 or the Fujifilm X-H2, X-H2S, and those are fantastic video optimized cameras with a real drawback. They have pretty unreliable autofocus, where the FX30 is using Sony's really good real-time autofocus tracking in video mode. And I was shooting family stuff, shooting animals at the San Diego Zoo, and I found it actually very reliable continuous autofocus. If you're looking at a camera in this price range for shooting video and continuous autofocus is really important to you, I don't think you could have a better option than the FX30. I always say good audio is just as important, if not more important, than good video quality. Fortunately, the FX30 gets all of the audio capabilities of the FX3, right down to being able to buy this camera with their optional XLR grip. It gets you 4 channels of audio, but even if you decide to save some money, you still get a 3.5 mic input and a 3.5mm headphone jack on this, so you can always expand the audio capabilities later. Basically, this camera is really good for recording good audio. What more could you ask for? One of my favorite features Sony introduced with the A7 IV is their breathing compensation. Now, breathing is when the lens focuses from minimum to infinity, you'll actually see the field of view change. It looks like the lens is zooming, and it can be super distracting in video recording. What the breathing compensation does is actually crop the image and adjust the frame as the lens focuses to make sure that you always have the same field of view. It's pretty cool technology. Now, unfortunately, it's only available with select Sony lenses, no third-party lenses, but it is a great tool to have access to. And now with the FX30, you'll actually be able to apply that breathing compensation in post. So you can choose, is the breathing super distracting in this shot and you want to get rid of it? You're willing to deal with a crop there, or is it not really a big deal and you don't want to degrade your image quality by cropping? Choice is up to you in post. That makes this feature even more useful. We also get the focus map feature, which puts a different color in front and behind the focal plane, but your subject that's in focus will actually be its natural color. I really like setting up shots with this mode, especially for like really precise things like product shots, but I do find it very distracting when I'm actually recording, so then I just disable it and go back to another mode. This camera has it, and I like it. The other new feature is not a big deal, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that now when you're cycling through your display settings, you can now have a completely clean display with absolutely no overlays on it. It's nice there. I talked about it, I mentioned it, I've done my job. But now to really do my job, I want to go shoot some raw video. So I'm going to do that, and I will join you all soon to wrap up this FX30 video. All right, it's a beautiful new day, and we've switched over to recording external ProRes RAW to an Atomos Ninja 5 Plus. Now, interestingly, the FX30 outputs 4.7K raw video, where it would be 6.2K if it was actually giving you the full output from the sensor, and unfortunately there is no open gate external recording with this camera. There is a small crop when we're recording raw, but it's a smaller crop than we'd see if it was just using the central 4.7K region of the sensor. And what that means is this is either line skipping or pixel binning in order to create this image, so that external raw video is going to be less detailed and noisier than what you get when you record internally. The only reason to shoot raw video would be to really push the white balance or have more control over the noise reduction settings. So for that reason, I would primarily stick to shooting this with the internal 10-bit video. Now, when you're back to shooting internal 10-bit with this camera, we have a really nice new feature. This gives you the option to upload your own LUTs onto the camera. And now you can use this to preview, like a lot of other cameras will let you, so you've got a good idea of what it's going to look like after it's graded. But this also gives you the ability to actually bake that LUT into the video file, so you don't have to do anything in post to apply it. Now, that could be a nice time saver, but remember, it's also not reversible, so you want to be very careful if you're using that feature. Now, one real issue that I've had using any of the Sony A6000 series bodies for shooting video, and even some of the Super 35 cinema cameras, is just a lack of really good native lenses for it. But in the last few years, we've really seen that improve. Sony's just brought out a bunch of wide-angle lenses that are optimized for video and actually quite nice and affordable. But also Tamron has brought out a great lens, like the 17-70, Sigma, the 18-50, the Tamron 11-20. It's just a lot of excellent third-party lens options now for Sony APS-C. So hopefully it's come through during this video that I have really enjoyed my time with the FX30, and my big question is, eventually I'm sure we're going to see a A6800, A7000, something like that, a hybrid body utilizing this same sensor, and I wonder how many of the cool video features won't be available in that, because my biggest issue using this camera over the last few weeks has been the lack of an electronic viewfinder. If we do wind up getting a full-featured hybrid camera in the future, that would be the better option for me. But if you primarily shoot with the LCD, or you need a very capable APS-C cinema camera right now, this is an awesome option. It's substantially less money than a Fujifilm X-H2S, even less money than the GH6 with a smaller sensor, and it's giving you better autofocus than either of those. With this feature set at this price, I can think of so many video creators where this is going to be an absolutely perfect camera for them, and hopefully you found this review useful. If so, you should reward me by subscribing to our channel. I'm sure Chris would appreciate that as well. Otherwise, check out DPReview.com. Richard has a great article about what this camera could mean for the future of the A6000 series. Take a look at that, and we will see you all again soon for more DP Review TV.